think you have two individuals who completely believe that their course is the right one in terms of U.S. China trade. You know both of them. You've been on behalf of the administration to China, I think you said in your book something like 8 times.
That was last year.
In 2018.
In 2018.
Yeah.
Talk about tenacity.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you see this working out?
Well, I think it's more interesting than two people because China has been the most rapidly growing country probably in world history over a 40-year period. And they did that with enormous energy, central planning, and also adopting a lot of things that emerging markets countries do, which is hiding behind high tariff walls, closing its markets, and if not closed, not making them as accessible as the developed world does, and doing different things with intellectual property. And the U.S. In the 19th century sort of did the same thing. We were a poor little country, and we found a way to use tariffs to protect ourselves. At a certain point, that creates imbalances around the world. So now that China's got $3 trillion of reserves, it's the biggest producer and fulfiller of jobs in the world. So jobs have moved from the developed world to China. Wealth has moved. And the global financial crisis basically created problems for the developed world. So now we have roughly half of the people, for example, in the United States, who have income insufficiency. They're in a bad way, and that creates populism. And when domestic candidates for being attacked don't result in change for the people who are in trouble, they find a foreign devil, and I was pretty sure it was going to be China for those reasons. So in effect, China recognizes that the circumstances of the world have changed, but like all people who have a really good deal, why would you change it? And you only change it because there's pressure, and the change ends up being in their interest. On the other hand, there are people in their country who don't believe that. They just want things the way they are. Remember, people don't like to change. And so here we have the developed world represented by the United States who wants them to change. So it's a very interesting thing where China knows it has to change. The U.S. wants them to change. It should be easy, except it's not easy because people don't like giving up advantage. And on the U.S. side, they would want to accomplish this rebalancing as quickly and as thoroughly as they can. So what's happening over the last 2.5 years, roughly, is these two giant countries, which together have somewhere between 35 and 40% of the world's economy. So this is like the two parents fighting, and the children, are like hiding. And they're upset. That's the rest of the world, which is slowing trade. But long term, potential decoupling of these two giant countries actually results in lower growth for everyone.
Right. And how much do you worry about that? How much do you worry about that decoupling? Because that seems to be the biggest worry in the world right now, is that mom and dad will come together.
A splitting of the world, essentially.
Apart.
Right. Well, partly that's happening because there hasn't been the overlap, and I think that because ultimately, people are rational on a certain level, that as these two countries see that that's not working for them, that they'll come to a table, which is what's happening now for the third time,
right?
And they're doing it not to just be helpful. They're doing it as they recognize that the short term in China can remain fine with policy adjustments, but they're borrowing from their future. And long term, if you really go off on your own and decouple and have a slower growing world, what's the win in that? That's not a win.
And what can you, Steve Schwarzman, do to help this along?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who know both countries, and I think it's important that people understand where this is ultimately going, which is not in their interest. And ultimately, I believe that people will act in their self-interest, and there will be an adjustment. No one can predict the way sort of the media wants what's going to happen in October, and it's sort of in the sort of I could guess, but it's a who knows, because it's really about primarily it's about China. They have their hardliners, they have their reformers. What do they actually want to put on a table?
And President Xi has to balance that right now.
Well, somebody has to balance it.
Yeah.
And in May, when the trade talks basically were, I was going to say suspended, but at that point they were ended. The balance of reform versus sort of the harder line position. The harder line people, in effect had more influence. Now, as it's all becoming more complicated, not just because of trade, other decisions that China has made over the last 2 or 3 years are creating more complexity there. They've got other things going on as well that put pressure on them. That they're coming and saying, let's see if we can do something, is sensible. You can't get caught up in two people, or any administration, because if we don't solve this problem, the attitude of the Democrats towards China is if not identical to the current administration, it's pretty close. So I think China recognizes that this is a structural issue. It's not one U.S. president, and so getting something to lower the temperature and helping growth globally is in everybody's interest.